And for more on this, we are joined by Melusi Simelani. He is the human rights defender with Southern Africa Litigation Centre. Melusi, great to have you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Leanne, and good morning to the viewers.
All right, June, as we know it celebrates a Gay Pride Month globally. What are some of the plans for this year, considering that we've had years of COVID restrictions with no gatherings allowed? I'm hoping this year we'll see a lot more happening.
I mean, absolutely. If you look at the history of Pride itself, Leanne, the strong resilience of the great Marshall P. Johnson and Randwika in '69 in New York City, where Pride started exactly, it reminds us of why it was so important for them to throw that very first stone as a form of protest. So with the coronavirus pandemic being so tough on queer persons in Southern Africa, and of course the entire world, because of our historical marginalization, it has reminded us to be more resilient. I mean, I'm talking about people being chased out of their homes because of their sexual orientation and gender identities, to have to be out of work because, remember, when the COVID restrictions came, in some of our countries, it was the low-lying jobs. It was the jobs in retail, for instance, it was just jobs in the lower jobs market scale that were most affected. And these are the jobs that queer persons are almost always able to attain. So it was more tough on us as queer persons, but we have learned to be resilient, and we are happy that things are starting to look more brighter for us as a continent in terms of the coronavirus. And we are happy that we are going to celebration in Malawi, in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, and in Eswatini. There's so much that is being done. And as a Southern Africa litigation, we are happy to support those initiatives.
I want to talk a little bit. I mean, you mentioned Eswatini, and if I'm not mistaken, the first ever gay pride or the parade that happened was in 2019. Do you remember this? How did it go?
It was in 2018, yes, and I was part of those who actually came up with this idea. It was so amazing. I mean, the last absolute monarch in the continent to be able to hold a successful Pride event, it was very nice. And I think for us, it was being able to do it for everyone. And there's a documentary that came out, and I believe I personally, having been behind making sure that these events happen, I never got to enjoy it while it was happening. But once I was able to see the documentary that was filmed, I was able to see the eyes of people speaking about what it meant to them. And then, Leanne, I can just say Pride is not just a protest. Pride is a celebration, and Pride is this moment where we are able to say we exist and we are not alone.
Sometimes, however, in certain areas and certain communities, a lot of members of the community do feel alone. And I mean, as much as we have come forward in terms of progress and awareness and acceptance, there's still a lot of places that need so much work. And I bring it to within the borders of South Africa. It's working very, very well, but is it still something that is a massive challenge on a daily basis for many?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. In Eswatini, for instance, we just had a judgment, and I'm happy that you covered it on the SABC News. We had a judgment where Eswatini Sexual and Gender Minorities is trying to be registered as a queer NGO, and it was denied by the government. And we, as the Southern Africa Litigation Centre, we supported that to bring it to the courts. And the judgment came out where they actually affirms that every citizen has the rights, except for queer persons who do not have the right to associate. And I mean, you can go all over the continent. Just in Malawi this week, we got reports that even though they were allowed to hold their Pride events, the city, I think it's in Lilongwe or it's in Blantyre, I'm still getting my facts right on that, they denied to receive a petition that was being delivered to them. And it gets to show you the hostility that we are facing at different stages, because of course, if you go all the way up to Ghana, for instance, it's a bit more grim. But I think the point that we're making is that there is so much work to be done, and we are not even halfway there in ensuring that there's social cohesion and there's equality for everyone.
Certainly we look at some countries, and I mean, Uganda is one country that jumps to mind, where we look at the legislation still around being homosexual or gay or part of the community in that country. It's still being battled in many, many ways. So talk to us about your views there.
I mean, absolutely. I've got colleagues of mine who are actually working in Uganda, and it's so beautiful to see that in spite of the grim political situation, because we call this colonial homophobia, Leanne, because we understand that most of these criminalizing laws are a legacy of colonization. And of course, we are not here to point fingers and say that we are better as Africans, or that historically or pre-colonization we were better and we had better treatment. But the truth of the matter is we have sort of moved away from the spirit of Ubuntu. I'm reminded of the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who spoke of how he would not go to a homophobic heaven. And I think that's the fundamental problem, where we have moved from colonial homophobia to political homophobia, where you have heads of government and heads of state who always uses this idea of attacking homosexual persons, even though I do not like that using that word, but they always attack us at the time when there is an election, because they know with the conservative nature of most people and with the religious inclination of most people, they will almost get this popular vote. So it's very, very unfortunate that we still have to fight on this, but we will continue at the Southern Africa Litigation Centre to work with activists on the ground, as we are continuing to work in the region, and ensure that we shine the spotlight on the lived experiences, and we continue to empower them to speak out for themselves, in ensuring that we create a better world. Because Leanne, it's about creating social cohesion and human development that is centered on the rights of those who are most marginalized in our societies.
I mean, when you just read the laws that are in place, I mean, in a country like Uganda, you have to worry. I mean, life imprisonment, that it's illegal to love somebody that is of the same sex, or it's a criminal offense. It's not the way that people behave. You kind of think, like, where are we living? And that's the kind of school of thought that is still happening in this day and age. One finds it very, very difficult, because there is a major push. And I must say, I mean, I know with my kids at school, at a very young age, you start speaking about people's rights, people's choices, whatever it may be, from a very, very young age. So they begin to understand and to not discriminate, because at the end of the day, it's exactly what it is. It's discrimination against somebody that you think is not behaving, you believe is the right way. There's no other way of putting it, actually.
It's always perceptions, Leanne, and unfortunately we have to continuously work on changing those. And then if you look at the picture globally, it's not just Africa, Leanne, that is dealing with this whole sort of moving backwards instead of moving forward. If you look at the United States of America, the Florida Don't Say Gay Act, it's one of those things that are actually showing us that there's so much work that needs to be done as a collective, as a global society. If you look at the Roe versus Wade judgment with the Supreme Court of the United States, that is sort of being tried to be reversed in terms of abortion rights, it speaks to how there's sort of this intersectional approach that we need to use as we are doing this queer activism, as we call it, because fundamentally, as you say, Leanne, it's about humanity, it's about human rights, and it's about being able to be who you are. And I'm so happy that you are having this conversation with us at the time like this, where we, as the Southern Africa Litigation Centre, with our partners across the region, we have come up with this campaign, which we are calling it Queer Without Borders. And what we're saying with this is the beautiful change that we're seeing in Botswana should actually be the same in Eswatini, and it should also be the same in Zimbabwe and Zambia and across the region. And we're happy that there's been so much change. If you look at Angola, for instance, they've been able to decriminalize not through litigation, but through the legislative process. And this, again, Leanne, shows that there is hope to think that this is actually a conversation about humanity. It's a conversation about creating a better world for our children, so that when they grow up, and I was talking at the United Waterford College in Swaziland just a couple of weeks ago, and they were asking me, how do I deal with it? Because it is so hard to advocate for queer rights, especially in Africa. And I was saying to them, look, we are doing the hard work so that you can grow up in a better world where you will continue to do the work, but you will have to do it better, because at the end of the day, our mental health should come first, and we need to be able to contribute broadly to social justice and broadly to the economies of this continent. But we cannot do that if we're being tried and we're being prosecuted for who we love.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one. One that it was a social media piece from one of my colleagues, that Peter Ndoro, who works in the evening here on SABC News, and he posted a picture. I think it was of Ellen DeGeneres and her wife Portia Durasi, who were visiting Zimbabwe. I think it was last week. I'm not sure, and they were holding hands in this photograph in Zimbabwe. And the caption he put on this, and he goes, "I wonder if they know that they can be arrested for doing something like that." And that that really hit. I actually had to look at this properly and then read it again and then look at the rights of what's going on in Zimbabwe. And that's still the case. It is mind-boggling to an extent where just a border away from that, you know, South Africa is seen as one of the most progressive countries when it comes to the rights of gay people and any other member of the community wanting to get married, living their truth. I mean, it's quite amazing. And yet right next door, something like that is illegal.
And that gets to show that there's so much that we can do as a SADC region, and the lobbying that we are going to continue to do as a Southern Africa Litigation Centre is to speak to the SADC region and speak to the African Union to say, remember the African Charter. Remember that we are all bound by the African Charter, which speaks to the respect for human dignity and the respect for human rights for all. And it doesn't matter who we love, because at the end of the day, we are all here to create a better world for our children and our children's children.
Yeah. Let's get a tiny little bit personal, if you don't mind. Your story. What is your story? I mean, you know, sometimes people, you know, turn on a TV and they see a hero in individuals and say, well, how did you get to this point and being comfortable with who you are and being accepted and fighting for the rights of others? Talk to us about you.
I grew up in a typical African family, Leanne, where there were Christian values, so there was no room for me to talk about my sexuality. But I think I was fortunate enough to be able to focus on education and focus on reading, and that is when I got to realize that I'm actually a queer person. But the flip side to that is once I realized who I was, I started to live comfortably without knowing the repercussions. And then, and I don't like speaking about this, I was sexually assaulted at high school by someone whom I called my friend. And me trying to get help actually showed me that as a queer person, it's not easy, because I couldn't get the help that I needed being sexually assaulted at 16 years of age. And I think that has made me a stronger person. And I think being able to have the family support and having colleagues that I work with today remind me that what actually happened that is so bad in the history is actually making me a stronger person. And that is why I'm making reference to what the coronavirus has done to us as queer persons, which is it has reminded us that we are actually resilient and we are stronger than our circumstances, and we will continue to work forward.
Amazing. Melusi, thank you. Thanks for talking to us. You keep on shining and keep on helping others, and a human rights defender with the Southern Africa Litigation Centre is Melusi Simelani, talking to us all about June, which of course is Pride Month, and it is the month that is dedicated to the LGBTQI plus people that, of course, as you've heard and we've all heard, are still under relentless attack. Getting much better, but there's a lot of countries, particularly on the continent, that need to review policies around that.